This is what I call my food savanna. It's really sort of popular to talk about a food forest. You have lots of different trees and plants that produce food. And I made an attempt at building a food forest here, and what I got was a food savanna because so many trees didn't grow the way I had planned to. So I have a grassland and we do crops in between. Last year we did sweet potatoes, but I still have food producing trees that are coming up, as you can see, just sort of interspersed. These are moringa. We eat the pods, we eat the leaves, and this is a native, what is it? It's a native jujube tree, and it came up on its own, and it has delicious fruit on it that produced all on its own with no effort at all. And then we have other fruit trees that I've planted. Right down in here is just a tamarind seedling. Before the last rainy season, I went through, and all of these swales, I have a swale about every 10 meters, and I planted tamarind seeds. And then I just waited for the rains to come, and I got one tamarind seedling out of all of them. But that's a tamarind tree, and I'll never have to water a tamarind tree because they're native and they live for hundreds of years. So that's something. And right over here, I planted a baobab tree this year. So baobab trees are enormous and they take up a huge amount of space, but they don't have a dense foliage and they only leaf out for half the year. And so they can be integrated with other trees. Next to the baobab tree, I have a volunteer senna tree from the bush that popped up on itself and is great for fertility. So we do have some forest aspects, but really it's savanna. And on the berm of my swales in rainy season, I grow pigeon peas, Cajanus cajans. We grow crops. It's more of a bush crop. We grow field crops, and we have fruit and vegetable trees in between. And I kind of like that system to have this wide open space with food producing trees sort of interspersed. The fertility is coming from all this undergrowth that we just lay down as mulch from year to year. But there is one input that we put into the system for fertility, and I'll show that to you right now. This is our one fertility input into what I call my food savanna, and that is our toilet compost pile. We compost here with peanut shells. That's an abundantly available resource to use as cover material in our toilets. And what happens is, unlike using sawdust or some really fine material, only half of the peanut shell material will decompose on the short term. There's little membranes that cover the peanuts and a little exterior membrane on the shell that decomposes quickly and hot composts with the toilet material. But then what you get, this is well aged, this is a couple years old, but what we get afterwards is mixed in with that compost is still the harder, more woody material of the inner peanut shell. So what we get out of that is a compost and a mulch at the same time. And so I'll spread that out wherever we're planting trees. People get a bit squeamish about using toilet material in their vegetable garden. That's understandable. It's well aged, so we put it under our trees. Another source of fertility, like in any good regenerative system, is our own chop and drop material. So looking here, we have a moringa tree, and here we have the detritus of a shia tree that we just chopped up and laid down. It'll pop back up the next rainy season. But those are really the only two ways that fertility is preserved and perpetuated in the system, is one from the toilet material and the other is chop and drop. And that's it. It's a really, really low maintenance system. Moringa trees never have to be watered. They have a tuberous root that has all the moisture in it they need, and we get vegetable year round from it. So that's a pretty good deal. Another resource we get from this savanna system is fiber, and that is from the weed bushes. So previous to my buying this property, it was a field for crops, and in all the fields around here, the majority of the trees end up dying off from being chopped back and burned every year. But this type of tree, it's a type of combretum. It's hard to kill off, and in fact it multiplies in poor soil. So you could call it a pioneer species, and it produces a lot of leaf fall. Underneath every one of these bushes is really rich soil, but it also provides a really strong wood for building. We use it in roofing, we use it in adobe walls, we can weave it. It's a great material to have on hand. We don't harvest it in any particular period, but it's just always here, right outside the house. You can cut a few sticks and use them for whatever you want. And then come cultivating season, we chop it down to the ground. It becomes compost and contributes to the fertility. Another zero maintenance tree is gum arabic, Acacia senegalensis. And once it gets fairly large, you can injure it very slightly in the right season. You get large amounts of sap that come out. You use it in cooking as a thickener. One common local usage is in making ink, and I do calligraphy, so I really appreciate that. I'll be using this resin to make ink. I'm standing in the swale. I have 5 swales on this half-acre property, and I'm in the swale right now. And sometimes people feel like a swale is sort of lost space. You're just harvesting water. Well, what I did last year is I took the seeds of a local vetiver grass. It's a really pungent smelling, really long, strong grass that's used for thatch. In fact, traditionally the grass is so strong, it's used to make shields that they would go to war with. And so I took the seeds and I just scattered them in this swale, covered it with mulch, and said, well, let's see what happens. And this year, it's growing. We have small little clumps of green grass. And in this African culture, grass is extremely valuable. Strong grasses used to make thatch walls, used to make roofs. It's used to even weave granaries. We use it everywhere, and it has a lovely smell. People even use it in tea. It smells so good. And so this whole swale is going to be producing fiber for building. Again, zero maintenance because it's completely native. All I had to do is scatter the seeds in here, throw the mulch on it. It's perennial, and so I get free building materials year in and year out. One of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge in doing agricultural projects in Africa are the livestock. Livestock are free range on principle. They're everywhere. You can't grow anything without the goats from the village eating it or the nomads, herds eating it who come through. So my solution this year is to build a thorn hedge. These are thorns that pop up in people's fields, and they chop them down every year. So this hedge here is built out of thorns chopped down in crop space, and the weed trees provide the posts, the weed trees that grow throughout the whole field. So it's a very sustainable, regenerative source for all the material for the fence, but it's labor intensive, and it has to be repaired every year. So I have about 2 acres here. And this year we put the time, I hired some refugees who needed the money to building this thorn hedge to protect a living hedge that I'm beginning here. And we're gonna have 4 species in this living hedge. Right now the greenery you see comes from cassava. Not the root cassava that people make starch or tapioca out of, but leaf cassava. It grows into an actual tree with a fairly thick trunk. And it's easy to grow because you just break off a stick and stick it in the ground. So we've planted this cassava every foot. And I kid you not, in 1 year, it will get to be about 4 meters tall with a trunk about as thick as my arm. So it's a great thing to start the living hedge with. But then we'll come behind that, and in 2 or 3 other rows, we can add lucina, we can add moringa, all of which are fast-growing trees. And I have a succulent jatropha that has bright red leaves that animals hate. I can plant in between. Those also grow from cuttings. So it's just a start, but it's already growing. We already have the framework for the living hedge in place. It's being protected by a renewable source of hedge built by people who needed the money. And hopefully, the idea is to eventually have a living hedge that will actually be too dense even for goats to get through by having 3 different layers of trees planted very, very close together. We'll see how it works. This is my front yard. This is Zone 2 food forest. These are native fruit trees. This is a marula. It's only 6 years old. It's already taller than the house, and it hasn't produced yet. We're really excited. I have about 6 of these right here in this yard. We're excited for when they start producing because it's like a cherry-shaped fruit that tastes like a really sour plum. But this is a food forest in our front yard, and people debate whether they want a food forest in their front yard because it can be a little messy. You want to mulch it. You want to put a lot of organic material on the ground to feed the soil. So my solution has been to ring my forest spots, if you will, with clay bricks. So we have a really sandy soil here. And so year after year, the rains dissolve these clay bricks. They deteriorate, and that clay gets put in the soil, and I just buy another load of clay bricks and stack them up again. So it solves 2 functions at once. It defines our forest floor area and leaves us cleared pathways in between that I mulch with abundant local peanut shells. And it also slowly, it's a very slow solution, adds clay to the soil. As you look towards behind me here, you see our house, and that's protected by a row of chaya for shade. And coming closer to us, there's a swale that's filled with mulch that has bananas and papaya trees. That receives water, our gray water from the house. Our sinks run into that swale. It receives all the water coming off the eaves of the roof. And so we have sort of layers of food forest all built on swales as we move out further into the yard. A fantastic source of fertility is, of course, manures. And it can be really labor intensive to be hauling manures. Chickens are really messy when they're free run. They leave the manure where you don't want it. But a really nice solution is pigeons. I'll show you. This is our pigeon house. This is where I keep a couple hundred pigeons. There are compartments that house them, and they raise their young, and all their manure falls right here in their house, which is right in the middle of my front yard food forest. So it's easy to just scoop up and put under, especially my new plantings, very rich. You don't really have to feed them much at all. They go flying out to find their own food. And all you have to provide is the nesting spot and water. Here's a young one right here. Future food forest fertilizer.